You're tuned to the wavelength of your own beauty. It's your host, Ahmed Yunus, and this is The Steps. Looking good, bro. I mean, really, like, for 17, 18 years out of law school, you're looking good.
Thanks, my man.
How are you?
I'm doing all right for living in COVID-19, summer of George Floyd, city of Los Angeles. I'm good.
You know, it's mind-blowing, man. It's mind-blowing. And I wanted to invite you, His Excellency Damien DeLaney, one of the people that I respect and love, and you know, the son of a humble man who happens to be a relatively, you know, significant historical figure from Southern Virginia. And I thought, Damien, like, exactly, the world is broken. And I want to try to cover three things: our current moment, Blackness, raising interracial kids, being in Southern California, your sense of kind of what's going to happen upcoming, etc. Number two, I want to try to cover the kind of uniqueness of racism today as opposed to when we were in school. Like, I remember a time where you couldn't really talk about things being racist because you would immediately just, all right, he's one of those, done, you're off, right? But what I really would love, if you were to be generous enough to do, is begin from like the beginning, like maybe like your dad's story, and then you coming up, what you were seeing, what you were feeling, how it kind of changed you, and then we can work our way to like the current moment. Is that possible?
Let me give it a shot, man. So,
my brother.
First of all, I mean, I have to say, I'm deeply honored to be here. I'm so proud of you, my brother, for doing.
Thanks, dog. Thank you.
I was excited about it from the jump when I heard you were doing this. I listened to your show on anti-racism after the George Floyd protests got going, and it was gorgeous, man.
Thank you, man.
I told you I blew it up on Facebook.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you. That means a lot coming from you, man. It means a lot coming from you.
And we have been friends and brothers for a long time.
Yeah, amen. Amen.
But let me see if I can kind of jump in the Wayback Machine and hopefully tell your listeners a little bit about who I am, where I'm from, about my father, obviously,
please,
and my ancestors as far back as I know. I grew up in the cradle of the Confederacy, Lexington, Virginia, a town you know well because you were a law student there with me at Washington University. In that town are interred the corpses of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, who are two famous generals in the war to preserve slavery and black subjugation. Their grave sites are shrines. Yeah. They are shrines for those who continue to worship the Confederacy and what the Confederacy stood for, at least in the mind of the white Southern person today. And I'm not sure I understand that. I don't know what they're celebrating. It hasn't existed for 150 years, but knock yourself out. But that's where I'm from. I was born in a hospital. It's been renamed as of the last month, but at the time it was called Stonewall Jackson Memorial Hospital. My father was also born in this town. And at the time that my father was born, the hospital was actually in Stonewall Jackson's historic house. It actually had a separate building at the time I was born, but
wow, so your dad was born in the historic house of Stonewall Jackson.
I feel like I want to get my facts straight on this, and he's going to check me on this as I'm saying.
I mean, he is like the professor emeritus of history.
Right. He may have actually been born at home, and I feel like I'm a little bit nervous about the facts on that.
Okay.
Let's suffice to say, though, that at the time, that hospital was located is Stonewall Jackson's historic house.
That's mind-blowing.
And you know, you've been there.
Yeah.
There, everything in that town is a commemoration of the Confederacy, and people come from miles around.
Yeah, Mecca.
To worship there, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Growing up there is an interesting thing. There is a Black community in Lexington, but there are not a lot of Black people in that part. There aren't a lot of people, period, in that part of the world. But it is Appalachia adjacent. It's the southern part of the Shenandoah Valley, and so most of the people there are white. There's a lot of poverty there. But Lexington itself is a college town. Washington leads there as well as Virginia Military Institute. So there's 2 4-year colleges in a small town that's, you know, maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 square miles and has 5,000 people.
Barely.
So it's the inside the town, there's a lot of both intellectual energy and also that kind of more cosmopolitan air of people, educated people coming in from the outside to either attend these schools or support these schools. That kind of creates a buffer or a distance from that hard scrabble poverty that exists just a few miles out of town.
Or even on like the other streets in town that are on the other side of the university. Yeah.
Well, right. And that's especially in town. A lot of those people are Black. The poverty is in most resorts, or the poor white people tend to live outside of town in the countryside. But a lot of the people in town who are poor are Black, and there is a sizable part of town that is kind of bounded by VMI and downtown Lexington. That is the Black community, and it's shrinking. I mean, in square footage, it's shrinking because VMI is expanding. The real estate that is taken up by Washington and Lee students historically has been expanding, although I think that's probably slowing because Washington and Lee has changed some of their housing policies. They're trying to get more students on campus. And the real estate, and you know, the term gentrification doesn't necessarily really work in a town of 6,000 people, but white people are buying real estate and have been buying real estate in that part of town for a long time. So, you know, when I was, and the house that my parents live in now was my grandmother's house at the time that I was a small child. And when I was 6, 7 years old and my grandmother lived in that house, every person on that street was Black. I would say when I go back home today, maybe 40% of the street is Black. And the rest of the people are white. And it's probably a mix between W&L people and I think W&L students, or you know, W&L faculty, staff, people that have
yeah. It's a big part of the economy, yeah.
But it's, you know, it's an interesting town. You know, I was thinking about before we got on tonight, kind of what the experience is to be a Black person in the South, as opposed to being a Black person in California or in New York City or things like that, and thinking about the interactions of Black people with white people. Because, you know, as and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, as our conversation evolves, but
Please.
I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the fact that Black people and white people don't really talk to each other. But in the South, and I think this is true regardless of all the South, but I can really speak only to my experiences growing up in Virginia. Black people and white people are in the same spaces all the time. And there is the interaction or the level of communication that happens between a Black person and a white person in the South, I think has a different freight to it the white person thinks they understand that black person, right? I think white people generally think they understand. Maybe they're even trying to understand where black people are coming from. But I think white people feel like they know, feel like they're okay, but they don't necessarily always engage with in a place like the South that you know, people don't like the term, I'm gonna use the term white privilege. That privilege emanates from a patriarchal system. And I don't mean patriarchy like feminists mean when they say patriarchy. It's not that patriarchy, it's the patriarchy of slave masters to their servants. A different kind of patriarchy that came from slavery and existed through the Jim Crow era, and I think in some respects exists to this day, where black people can come in and out of white spaces as long as they follow the rules.
Yes,
as long
sir.
As you're in your place.
Yes, sir.
Know your role.
Yes, sir.
And you don't ruffle anybody's feathers. Don't be Emmett Till, right?
That's right. No, man, it's not even Emmett Till. I remember the first time I got a death threat after being on like the O'Reilly Factor a gazillion times was when I started talking about topics that have nothing to do with Islam or Muslims. Then I was like, nah, this is not okay. Like, you can come on and like, you know, pretend for your people, but we're not going to pretend like you're a mainstream person at that point in time. Right. It's interesting because my first memory of being in Lexington was walking into, man, it's closed now. It wasn't like, if you're leaving campus, the Palms is to your left. You pass like 1 or 2 blocks. There was
yeah, the Oasis.
Oasis. There we go.
That place was a dump.
Bro, you would walk in, like I walked in, like I straight, because remember, like I went from Cuba to Lexington. I was studying like in Cuba for the summer. So I went Cal Poly, like Southern California, Cuba, Lexington. 3rd day of orientation, we walk into this place and it's literally like parted. The sea is parted, white and black, except for like the darts game. Or like that one crew in the corner that looks like they grew up together. Like, you're right, within the bounds. But isn't that the tool? Like Robin DiAngelo says in White Fragility, I've never met a white person that doesn't have an opinion on race. And what you're talking about, black folk having to manage the sense among that kind of patriarchal elite that like, don't worry, I'm not going to challenge what really matters to you. And that kind of like that smarts that's necessitated by survival and the need for advancement, it travels through generations, no?
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think that's absolutely, there's a cultural currency that gets passed down from parent to child, generation to generation. This is what it takes. And it may not even be spoken. Like for me and my parents, I don't think we ever had any sit down talks. Like black people talk about, I think especially if you grew up in cities, people talk about the time you have to have the talk with your child. I never had to talk with my parents because I grew up in a town of 6,000 people. And, you know, I, as a child coming up, I never got hassled by the police in Lexington because they all knew me. And 2 of the cops in Lexington were black, 2 out of like 6 of them, right? So that wasn't where like racism would hit me. You know, racism might hit me at school. Racism would hit me at the school where the teachers wouldn't want to let me into the gifted and talented program, or the teachers wouldn't want to give me the same opportunities that they would readily give to white kids. And I'm just generalizing there. We could get into specifics, but we got limited time. But you know, I didn't worry about police, but there was still a survival skill of staying in your lane. And I'll tell you one of the big ways that it was enforced when I was a child was on the notion of being smart, working hard in school, giving a shit about your grades, was not acting black. And I hear a lot of, I'm just gonna say conservative leaning African American people today talking about, you know, how they got ostracized by other Black people about acting Black. That was not my experience. I would get that from white kids. I would also, to the extent I got it from Black kids, I always felt like, or I think as an adult looking back on it, I felt like I got it from Black kids who were being performative because they themselves were, you know, insecure or
Wrestling,
trying to wrestle with like not being able to access the opportunities that they needed to be successful. And that is a hard environment. You know, I was very fortunate when I think back about my my upbringing in Lexington. I was on the right side just by dint of birth and my father's hard work and my mother's hard work, that I fell on the side of the, you know, for lack of a better word, the Black bourgeoisie of Lexington, right? My mother is an elected official. My father was a part of, he wasn't a faculty member when I was a small child, he was a student, but he was a part of the Washington Lee community. He had been a highly regarded staff member at the university before he became a student. And so, you know, for me, I kind of had the, and I'll use the word again for myself, I had the privilege, I think my whole life of growing up in Lexington, of being in that space.
You're not a townie. You're that's it.
Exactly.
You're at home, but you're not treated like a townie.
Right. And that was interesting. So my experience at the Oasis, by the way, when the Oasis really only ever existed for me when I was a law student. So it was not like there was some period of time that I hung out there before.
Sure.
I mean, I guess I was a year ahead of you in law school.
You were.
So other than that year that I was there, that you weren't there, there was no time like when I was a teenager or in undergrad that I was hanging out. I hung out there in the same time frame that you did. But when I would go in there, 9 times out of 10, I would be over on the side with the other law students because I didn't know any of the town folks in there. But sometimes I did. And on those nights when there would be friends of mine, like, and I mean, I use the word, I'm using the word friend really broadly, right? But people that I knew from school, like high school or elementary school, would show up in that bar. Then I would just be like going between the sides. And I'd go over and I'd chop it up with them for a little bit. And then I come back over to the law school people. And I was also kind of like based with the law school people because these were the people I came with. But I would see, oh, you know, hey, what's up? What are you up to? And they'd be, oh, I'm down in North Carolina, or I'm driving a truck, or I'm doing this, and catch up with these people. And these people who, a lot of them, you know, I can think of several people I ran into in the Oasis that I was like bullied by in 6th grade, 7th grade. And I see this, oh shit, I don't want to see that asshole. And then you run into him at the bar. But wait, you know where I'm going with this, right? You run into this dude at the bar and he'd be like, Damien, what's up, man? And you start chopping it up with him and he'd be like, so what you up to? And I'd be like, oh, I'm here at the law school. And he'd be like, no, I'm so fucking proud of you, man. And then it would be like, we were all friends.
Wow.
And it's the dude, you made it. You made this opportunity. You got out of, you got out of this, you know.
Because literally the law school is the apex of Lexington. Like there's no med school there. There's no other law school. There's no, like, it is the top.
Right. Well, just, I mean, take it even away from that. It's like for, I think the average kid going to school in Lexington whose parent is not a professor at one of the schools, or whose parent is in a blue collar job in Rockbridge County somewhere. That kid is also like their best bet, unless not only are they exceptional, but also somebody takes them under their wing and mentors them and develops them and pushes them into opportunities, they're going to remain there. And I mean, I think this is true. This isn't just true of Lexington. This is true of so many places in the world. But it's like these kids, you know, when back in 1991, I was Steve Erkel, right? In 2002, Damien, who I used to give wedgies to back behind the school, is now a second-year law student, third-year law student in Washington. This dude's gonna be a lawyer. He's gonna get rich. I'm not rich, by the way. But like,
yeah.
Perspective.
No, of course.
Like that's like shit.
Pinnacle,
He got out.
yeah.
He got out. And you know, there's some people.
And this Damien, you're talking about white people and black people, right?
Oh yeah.
That have this perspective.
I'm not making a racial distinction.
So the idea of like getting out when you're a kid that grows up in a rural community of 5,000 people is kind of like a cross-racial example of the idea of getting out of like the inner city and achieving out of the projects and achieving. There actually is a rural version of that in America.
Absolutely, or at least I think the idea of getting out of poverty, getting out of struggle, bringing yourself to the middle class lifestyle where you can provide for yourself, for your family, you can feel proud of what you do, and you can have an ownership, like you can own your own home, or you can own your own business and feel like you're a person who is self-sufficient, successful. And that is so important to people. That's what makes good citizens, in my opinion, are people who feel like they are okay. Like they have worked hard and they've gotten paid for their hard work, and that they feel fulfilled. And they're able to take care of themselves and their families. And I, largely because I did have mentors and I did have people pushing me, and I did have opportunities literally placed in my lap. Which is a really, I have to say, is a really incredible thing for a Black kid from a town in rural Virginia of 5,000 people to have opportunities placed in my lap. But I think it was a little bit of hard work and a lot of having parents that worked really hard, having parents who position themselves to create opportunities for me. In the same way, by the way, that white folks position themselves for their kids, and sometimes have structures that make it a little bit easier for them to do it. There's
a check on the application.
And so that's it. I mean, it's really for, I think, a lot of people in rural America, in Appalachia, or in West Virginia, Western Virginia, that part of the world, there is a lot of struggle, and there is a lot of lack of opportunity, and people don't have great opportunities fall in their lap. And I think it's just starts from, and I don't know what was happening with these kids in 6th grade at the time. They were calling me Steve Erkel and making fun of my jump shot and all that shit. But it was, I think a lot of that is just born of kids trying to find their place in the world and trying to find their focus, and whether there were not just people, but also a support structure around them to enable them to get there.
It's amazing because, like, as you're talking, I literally feel myself now. I'm like driving, the Palms is on my right, and I'm going in, and the fraternity houses are starting to appear, and I'm thinking, like, even the imagery of Lexington, Virginia, every sorority house looks like a plantation. Like the difference, like when you are in Lexington, Virginia, the town, at some random person's house who is not wealthy. I mean, there are homes that are not far from like a trailer with no, you know what I mean? Like the construction that, like, we're talking about rural poverty. And the university literally is like Rome. Like the buildings are massive, the bridges over the, you know what I mean? Like it's truly a completely different world. And I can imagine that the divide for in Chicago or in LA or in New York or whatever, the divide between people who have privilege in a space and people who don't, I can imagine it's just as like big of a divide. But like the imagery of Lexington really reinforces the idea that like you're either walking into one of these doors or you're walking into one of those doors. And literally like the buildings are on hills. Like it's literally like this quasi-religious, not religious, but you know what I mean? Like this quasi-magical conception of success that then translates into what they think Trump should be able to do in the White House, or what they think the definition of America really is once those tensions take on like a racial meaning. Like, how can we begin to think through the impact of the current moment on those living in that kind of poverty in a way that appreciates the difference of race?
That's an interesting question. I'm going back to your George Floyd podcast and some of the ideas that you were talking about there. And I know this is one that I know Ta-Nehisi Coates has talked about. I think Robin DiAngelo talked about it. And that's the idea that race is basically a construct, right? It's not real. It's just something that has been designed to create a social order. And to put that in fine relief in a place like Lexington, Virginia, Rockbridge County, Virginia,
where there are actually slaves in the soil of the university at one point in time.
Under the new multi-million-dollar courthouse they built, all of that.
Amazing.
The one thing that the poorest of the poor white person has in that community, and frankly, anywhere else in America, the one thing that dirt poor white person has is that they are not Black. And I think the notion that has been talked about for 100 years or more of breaking down the racial caste system so that people can align on a class basis, right? So poor people can join together, is hard work to do. And nobody has really figured out how to unlock that. I think in a place like Lexington, people are very invested in the trappings of what it means to be a white Southerner. As you're aware, we're in a moment right now, our community of Washington LE, the alumni, or a very large body of alumni, of which I'm a participant. My father's a participant. I believe you're a participant.
Absolutely.
A number of us have joined in to raise our voices to change the name of the university, at least to remove Robert E. Lee's name. The very brilliant law professor, Brandon Hasbrook, who I don't know if you met Professor Hasbrook. He's a very impressive dude. Wow. Black professor at the law school who is younger than we are, but dude is punching above his weight class. Very impressive guy. And He didn't pay me to say any of that.
No, it's all good. It's coming after.
He has written in the Washington Post, I guess probably about a month ago, that we should remove both names. We should remove both names because George Washington was an unrepentant slaveholder. And, you know, I don't know if you saw this, but recently there was research that came out of Mount Vernon that George Washington's false teeth were extracted from the mouths of African slaves.
Yes, I was reading that.
Professor Hasbrook's thesis is, among other things, well, if we are going to modify this name to take a position against racism, we should remove the names of both slaveholders whose names are. But leaving that argument to the side,
amazing.
There's a lot of people in that community who are not alumni. They are staff members, or they're just people who live in the town, who think it's a travesty that we are stepping all over their heritage. We're telling them they can't fly their flag. We're telling them
which literally was at the gas station when I went to, like, in 2001, the Confederate flag was flying at the gas station at the bottom of Main Street in Lexington, Virginia.
I will tell you that people from the North and the West come to the South, and they're surprised when they see Confederate flags, because if you're from the North or the West, you see a Confederate flag so rarely that when you do see it, you assume it's a white supremacist. They're flown everywhere in the South.
Bro, the truck stops, like the shirts and the like little like knickknacks in the truck stops and the
bumper stickers, T-shirts, baseball caps, beach towels. The stars and bars are everywhere. And they're everywhere because it's something, this is my opinion. This is my opinion. Don't quote me on it. I haven't done any research on it, but just from my lived experience as a Black Southerner, I think white people are holding on to it because it's like their security blanket reminder that they're in charge. And that's at all levels of society. I mean, they might not, the poor white people might not be in charge vis-a-vis the rich white people, but they definitely are a rung above, you know, even the, you know, white shoe lawyer Black guy who lives in LA but comes back to see his parents every couple of years, or a couple times a year. So that to me is, so like
blue collar white is better than Black guy that dresses at Alvin Dennis or whatever, like that local, like, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you get that dog, is that a
Alvin Dennis tag, dog?
Welcome to the study, my man.
Yes.
I love it, dog. I love it.
We got to do an Alvin Dennis promo on your podcast.
I'm so ready. You know, Alvin Dennis, you know, we got a lot of suits in the back that we could just start wearing, and then you could just send us some nice stuff. Okay. Can I take you to a different moment in your life? You meet a brilliant woman and you decide that you're just going to bust out into the world for a somewhat protracted period of time, right? Like, you guys are like a year or something, or maybe. What was that like? What did that do for you? What were you seeing? What was the need for it? How does it like add to the richness of your kind of perspective on things?
Love that question. So let me set the context of it first, which is my wife and I actually met at Washington Lee. We're both at the law school. But we didn't really know each other at the law school. We really met in a clerkship afterwards when we were clerking for the same judge in Lexington, Kentucky. And we, at the end of that clerkship year, Kara, my wife, had decided that she was going to, when she ended, she wanted to do around the world plane ticket, something like that. And she tried to do it. For some reason, she couldn't work it out. She ended up going to study Spanish in Barcelona, which is kind of a hilarious story to hear her tell it because they don't really speak Spanish in Barcelona. But
Catalan, yeah.
she lived with a Cuban woman though.
Oh.
So but the Cuban woman didn't really speak much English, so it was like really hard. But that was 5 weeks in Spain, and then she came to Los Angeles and she joined a law firm here in Los Angeles. I was right out of law school. I worked in Chicago for a few years, and then I took the California bar and I came out here shortly before we got married. This is 2007, 2008. So for a while, she kept saying, I'm really sad I didn't do that around the world trip. It's like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I'm like, career. Like we work in big law firms. It's never going to happen. And she's like, well, you're only young once. And, it was just chipping away at me. I was the one who was resistant to doing it. And then, gosh, I don't even remember now anymore. At some point I was like, you know what? Let's do it. I think I was at one of those points where I had gotten kind of, in I know you didn't practice, but when you practice, there are times that come along when you are like, this sucks. Yeah. And especially when you're a young associate. When you get more senior and you get to do more of the fun things, those moments happen less, I think. But when you're an associate, you're doing a lot of grunt work and you're working a lot of long hours doing grunt work, there are a lot of times when it really sucks. And the sales pitch of we only live once, we'll always be able to come back and get jobs, and our timing was impeccable in that respect, which I'll explain in a minute. We decided to do it. My parents were not thrilled, but I was like, all
those years to get you to the law firm, and now I'm out.
Well, we had stashed away a bank because we had been working in big law when salaries were kind of, they're way higher now, but they were very high in the late 2000s. And we didn't have a mortgage, we didn't have kids. So all his money was going in the savings account. It was just, so we were like, we've got enough cushion so we could easily be unemployed for a year plus. And we want to do this, we're gonna go do it. And we drove cross country because we decided
this country.
Okay. So one of the guiding principles of this trip was to do it on the cheap, and very intentionally so. Not because we were really trying to like limit how much we spent, more that we were trying to have a more genuine and authentic experience by traveling closer to the ground. And not like, nothing is going on in those resorts, in those Western hotels.
And they're all exactly the same.
You're not learning anything about the culture or the place that you're in if you're staying at the Westin. Yeah. So, so we decided, one of the first things we were like, we're not flying out of LAX, we're flying out of JFK. And we are going.
Oh, wow. And you're in LA right now. Okay.
Yeah, we're in LA.
Wow.
So we took my car to Lexington and left it with my parents for the year. We sold Kara's car. Left my car with my parents for the year. And my dad drove us to DC, where a good friend of mine, who now lives in South Africa, who's an amazing person, I'm going to shout her out, Jackie Tully. And threw a going away party for us in DC. And then the next day we got on the Chinatown Express out of Chinatown, DC. You were in the Baz bus.
Yeah, man. That. Oh my God, that took off from right next to my building from the Meridian. That's a 5th and H.
So you gotta start. You gotta start traveling close to the ground.
That's right.
You could take the Acela.
You could.
Or you take the Baz bus. Now the Baz bus has Wi-Fi, and there's plenty of BC to New York commuters on there. But there's also, there's a lot of realness there. So we took that to New York. We stayed with my Aunt Teresa in New York for a few days, and we jumped on a plane to Dublin. And and I could spend 2 hours alone telling you like play by play of this trip. I'm gonna try to summarize it a little bit because I think like we want to talk about impacts on me and kind of takeaways from this experience, which I would advise if it's something you're thinking about doing, listeners to the study, I think is worthwhile. I think it's a very worthwhile thing. There's so much that we get from cultural exchange. There's so much that we get from travel, from seeing the world from a totally different perspective. We've traveled in Christian countries, Muslim countries, Buddhist countries, seen, traveled in Africa, traveled in Asia, traveled in Europe, seen all different types of people, interacted with all different types of people on this trip. When I think about, I think about the trip, I think about some things that give me pain. One of my favorite parts of the trip to talk about is the part when we were in Syria. And our trip was before the Arab Spring. So, nothing that has happened since 2011 that we think of when we think of the Middle East now, none of that happened then. And all of those dictators, some of whom have been deposed, some of whom have not, all of them were around then.
Firmly in power.
Firmly in place. Firmly in place. And we went to Syria. And that at the time was a gorgeous country.
Of course.
Now, I think we walked around in the souk in Aleppo. That's what rubble now, right? We were in one of my fondest memories of being in Syria was when we were in Damascus, and we were in a coffee shop in Damascus, and Kara and I, although she's way better than me, but Kara and I enjoy playing backgammon, which made us fit in
nice
the Middle East like perfectly. You just sit down.
I love it.
So we were in this little coffee shop in Damascus. It was right outside the souk, right near our guest house. And there were these, I think there were 4 or 5 dental students in there, all of whom spoke gorgeous English. They just started interacting with us like, out of the gate. And I speak no Arabic, none. Yeah. So,
despite looking like an Egyptian whose father's from Morocco, you speak no Arabic. Yes, exactly.
I have a Cairo story for you, by the way. If I haven't told you before, we're gonna get to
I have to hear it. Yeah.
But these young people befriended us in the coffee shop, and then invited us to lunch the next day. And we met them around the same place. Everybody piled into a taxi, and they took us to this part of town that we would not have found on our own, right?
Of course.
This is because you are interacting with locals.
Yeah.
And took us to lunch.
It's because you're beautiful, and this space has people who have good radars, but keep going.
This was where I developed a lifelong love of kanafa.
Yeah, that's it, Doc.
Like an addiction level, like where can I find this delicious treat? It's in Orange County, I know.
Oh, man. Oh, man. I love it. I love it.
But the pain of it is knowing how much devastation is there. Thinking about these beautiful young people who were so kind to us and so giving to us, and wondering about their safety as the violence played out there. One of the most gorgeous places I've ever been, and I don't know if you've been there, but we went to Palmyra. It was a very long, very close to the ground. Like you're on a minibus to go out there and just cross the desert, and it's almost in Iraq, right? Wow. And it's just absolutely beautiful. and there aren't that many Westerners there. Like this is definitely like a backpacker type destination. There's not tour buses pulling in. So you're going around the ruins and you basically have the place to yourself, and they're beautifully preserved. And when, when ISIS was destroying sites there, 3-4 years ago, I mean, I was just in tears. Because it's such a beautiful place as that, such a relic of humanity. Just being destroyed kind of as a show of force is, I think, a great tragedy. And
it really, that's the word. It's a tragedy.
And so there's a lot of pain there. But then I also think I was in Tahrir Square before it was Tahrir Square.
Wow.
We were 3 blocks away from there when we were in Cairo, and walked through it every single day. So when the Arab Spring happened, and when all of us watching, I was like, oh, I know that place. Like,
that's where I get to show shawarma when I'm in Cairo.
But so, but you say like I look like an Egyptian. So I have 2 funny stories. One was the time I was in Chicago, when I lived in Chicago, and I was in a cab out to O'Hare, and I had this great cab driver who was Egyptian. And he's a really chatty dude. He's like,
that's great.
He's talking to me. He's like, where are you from, my man? And I say, I'm from Virginia. He's like, what? He's like, no, I got to tell you. He's like, you look Egyptian. And I'm like, thank you, I'm not. But then in Cairo, Kara and I were going out to, you probably know this. I didn't know this until I was in Cairo, but this is a little travel tip. I don't even know that this is the case today. This is a 10-year-old travel tip I'm going to give to your listeners, which is in Cairo, there is a fantastic Italian restaurant in the Italian embassy. Did you know about this?
Wow, yes, I do.
Oh, you do know about it. Okay.
Well done.
So Kara and I went out to dinner at the Italian embassy in Cairo, and we're walking there. We're walking through a little commercial area where there's, little retail shops.
Zamalek, I think it's in Zamalek, right? Yeah.
You know better than I do.
All right.
Since I've been there, but we were walking by, and there are all these guys touting their goods on the side of the street, and we're out for a stroll, and this dude was doing the most to sell his stuff. He's in a shoe store, I think. And he comes down to the street and he gets like into my path, starting the sales pitch in Arabic.
Yeah.
And he's going like hard at me, like eye contact with me, going in on how he's gonna sell me, whatever he was trying to sell me. And I look at him and I'm like, I speak English. And listen. So then the dude, so I say to him, like, I speak English like this. And the dude stops and look, he just stops for a minute. Like this, just, and then just busts out laughing. So then we're laughing, right? Like, it was so great.
It's so amazing. I always think of like that film where Malcolm is in, downtown Cairo, and some guy's like, where are you from? And he goes, Harlem. And the Egyptian guy, he goes, Harim. Harim is like women. Like, I want women. And the Egyptian guy's like, yeah, Harim. We got that. Don't worry about that. We got that. It's amazing though, right? Because the question is like, what happens to your identity in these moments? Like, your Americanness, your blackness, your non-towniness, your like, what happened? Like, does it shift and fluctuate? Is it truly liquid, or is it static to some extent?
No, for me, 100% liquid. And I will tell you that when I was traveling around the world, like, I didn't know who I was, because I didn't know how people on the street were interacting with me. Like in Paris, people probably thought I was Tunisian or Moroccan, right? In Morocco, people thought I was Moroccan. I would get very similar to what I just described in Cairo. People coming up to me, speaking to me in French or speaking to me in Berber, and I'm like, French, I can kind of maybe make out what you're saying, but I definitely can't communicate with But in Africa, who am I? You know, it is interesting because, you know, going to South Africa, for example, which is one of my favorite countries. I love South Africa was the first time I was like, I'm not really black here, huh?
Wow.
Because
wow.
I would meet people in South Africa that looked like me, but they weren't black, they're colored. We had an interesting, it was an interesting encounter. I got in an extremely minor car accident in South Africa, in a rental car. It was, I mean, to the minor to the point that there was no damage, but like some superficial paint scratches, right? But it was on the motorway. It was really weird. Like this dude, both cars were going slow, and this dude like goes to overtake me, like sideswipes. But it's a rental car, so we freak out. And we're in a foreign country, and we don't like, we know what we would do with this in America. We don't know what we would do with this in South Africa. So of course we do the worst thing, which is call the rental agency and be like, what should we do? And the rental agency says, go get a police report. So the next thing we do, we're in a South African police station for like an hour.
Is this in Cape Town or Joburg or?
No, rural. This is between like Port Elizabeth and Durban. Like the
this is where like staying close to the ground bites you in the ass. Okay, very good. Yeah.
So we go into this police station, and we tell the guy what was going on. He calls the other driver, by the way. He's talking to the other driver who's Kosa. You know, the cop's probably Kosa too. He says you sped up to avoid being overtaken, and I'm like, come on, man. But anyway, like,
are you guys really doing this to me right now? Yeah.
These guys talking to me. He's like, okay, like, I'm gonna give you a police report. So he writes it up, and there's a box there for driver's race. And there's 4 categories: black, colored, Asian, and white.
Bro, this is in Morocco, in South Africa.
South Africa, right.
This is in South Africa, a land where like the history of why this comes to be. Okay, so you're in an accident, you get the form, and the form is asking you to identify. Good.
Not asking me to identify. Asking the officer to identify. He's filling out the report. So he's describing me. And he hands me the report, and he's marked the box Asian.
Oh my God.
And I am like, oh my God. I want to correct this? I'm not, the one thing, there were 2 boxes that he picked that could have been right, and 2 boxes he picked that were definitely wrong, right? I clearly wasn't white, and so he didn't select that one. I'm not Asian. I have no Asian ancestors. And I don't really think, although maybe people looking at this on YouTube might disagree, I don't think I look South Asian. I don't look North Asian either. But that's what he selected. And I had a conversation with myself as to, does this matter? And I decided it didn't matter. I didn't end up using the police report. It may be in a file somewhere in this house for all I know. I'm pretty sure it did come back to America with us and did not go to the rental agency because we were able to buff the scratches out. But,
my man. Wait, but this is mind-blowing, right? Because now the son of the blue-collar staffer who became professor emeritus of history, specializing in African-American history, is in South Africa, seen by the authorities as colored, not black.
Asian.
Which is but
yes.
They're assuming that your parents or ancestors come from South Asia.
I was not seen as black, and within their racial caste system, I was elevated above it.
Yeah.
Now the other thing that's tricky is just by dint of being an English speaker, you are elevated above the people that are around you. And then I think also by dint of being an American.
Sure.
Now, all bets are off in COVID-19 where we can't travel anywhere anyway, but I'm talking about,
Before we
the
made it great.
times, right? Another, just a real quick anecdote about South
man.
Africa.
This is beautiful, man.
Well, I had a couple of Africa anecdotes. One more about South Africa. And these are both about race, but when in Cape Town, have you ever been to Cape Town?
Yes.
Okay. So you know that you've got this beautiful inner city that's like a jewel and surrounded by these clapboard townships. And these townships have a life of their own, 100%. And we were staying in the city at a guest house, and the proprietor, this guest house was run by, the progressive white English people, or Australians, like they were super liberal, and they had this idea, oh, you guys should go to there's this great place in the townships you should go, which is called Mazzoli's, and Mazzoli's is a butcher shop, but every weekend they have a braai, South African for barbecue, if you aren't in the know. And
BRAI, braai, yeah, barbecue.
You go to the meat counter inside and you pick out whatever you want, and then you take it back to the chef who's back at the grill. He grills it for you, brings it out. There's a package store across the street if you want to get your beer. And there's live music, and it's just a party. And so we said, Kara and I were like, that sounds like fun, let's do it. And then at dinner that night at the guest house, we ended up sitting with this great guy from Australia named Steve, who I haven't seen since then because he's Australian, but I think we're Facebook friends. Steve was a cool guy. Steve was like, oh yeah, I'd be down to do that too. So the three of us pile in a cab and we go out to Mazzoli's. And the whole time the cab driver is like, you know where you're going, right? Because I'm in a car with white people, right? And he's like, are you guys sure about this? And we're like, no, we're good, man. Like
we're down for barbecue, dog. Don't worry, I know barbecue.
We're good. So we get there, and it's great. Like we go through the whole thing. We get our food, we order up, we're waiting for our food. We've got our beers, and we go into, there's like a little dance hall set up where the music is, and we're just checking out the dance hall. We're in there, and this dude comes up to me. Pats me on the shoulder. He's like, what's up, man? And I'm like, I'm good. How are you? He's like, what's your secret, dog? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, what hotel are you with? And I'm like, I'm staying. I think I even told him where I was staying, which was probably the wrong thing to do. He's like, no, dude, no, tell me the truth. Like, what hotel are you with? And I was like, I told you, like, I'm just staying at this backpackers hostel, right? And it, like, I wasn't getting it at first, but this dude misread this whole situation. He thought that Kara and Steve were a couple and that I was their guy. And he was trying to figure out where I was meeting these white people that wanted to come out here and like how much they were paying me. And like, this seems like a great gig. Like, how can I get in on this? Like, let's get some white people out here and make some money. And
so only because Kara is not black.
So then the situation is really trippy because I think Kara may even have figured it out before I did, because she comes over and she puts her arm around me and essentially says to this dude, oh, he's with me. And dude's face, first of all, completely changes. He goes from like hassling me to like this huge smile and says, my man.
You're even better than what I thought you were, my brother. This is not a business deal. This is a life deal.
Right.
That's hilarious.
So,
that's hilarious.
It was like,
bro, that's mind blowing.
Like, without that proximity to whiteness, people would just assume certainly in South Africa, where there was more history of racial mixing, people would assume that I was part of that community or part of that environment. And there's something that's actually really kind of cool and comforting about that. Like, I did feel like a kinship with that dude, even though I was not a guide and I wasn't out there trying to hustle.
No, but it's real, right? Like like you've just named two countries that are like the diametric opposites of Lexington, Virginia, right? Like Cairo, 3, Morocco, South Africa. In all 3, you gave examples of how, like, no, you don't understand, man. They thought I was from there. That's how much, like, I fit in. And I think those experiences, like, I remember when I graduated from college, I went to Cuba. And in Cuba, there would be times we were on, like, this academic exchange where the informal, what's it called? The local organizing committee for the defense of the revolution.
Oh.
They would be, like, standing in front of the hotel. Like, we would go out to a hotel or whatever, because we were staying, like, in like an old golf course in the days of General Batista that was changed into, like, a graduate arts live campus type of thing. And we would go to these nice places, and often the person at the door would just be like, nah. And I'd be like, wait, what do you mean? Wait, what do you mean, nah? And he's just like in Spanish. And I would just be like, bro, I don't know what this guy is saying. And every time somebody would be like, he's saying that you're not allowed in this establishment. Cubans are not allowed in this establishment. Yeah. And it was this, like, apartheid tourism system. This is 2001. It was this apartheid tourism system where most of the places did not permit Cubans to come in. And so because your ass looks Cuban, we're going to need to talk here for a second. I was once in Brussels, and I was walking in the street, and I was in this like whatever conference, whatever we're walking through. I think this might even be while I was in law school. We go through, these kids are playing soccer. Clearly they're like Moroccan or Algerian or something. I play a little bit of soccer with them. We're done. We keep walking through the street. 3 minutes later, a dude walks up, taps me on the shoulder, hands me my wallet. And he's like, bro, like, we opened it. It says Ahmed. Like, we felt like it's not right to take it from you. So I just want to make sure you got it back.
Oh, damn.
So, like, the idea of, like, how identity is truly fluid, how we see reality as Americans in such a static form, that everybody, like, clenches, you know what I mean? Like, everybody goes to, like, defense mode, or things become very electrified, when in other parts of the world, there are kind of ways of being and knowing that arise as common. Like, you met a lot of dudes on your trip through all those countries, and you were just like, I respect that kid's hustle. I respect how that kid's trying to do this. I respect. So it's illuminating to be able to hear you talk through this. You've been lawyering in a bow tie since very early, and it is very late at night, but I have a couple of more questions, if you would be so kind.
I got it. Let's keep going,
man.
I mean, I know you don't want to have a 2-hour-long podcast, but
I don't care. That's why we made a podcast, bro. And I can do whatever we want. These are for me, brother. These are for the audience. Take us to the current moment. So, like, we went through, when we were students, we did not live in an environment where, like, I remember when we were students, Dorothy Brown's critical race theory textbook was still her articles bound at, like, the Xerox FedEx place, right? And then fast forward to my brother's the editor-in-chief of Gallup. He's inviting Dorothy Brown as, like, critical race theory, right? So, like, we were there.
That show was so great, by the way.
You're so awesome, Doug. No, he's dope, dude. He's the man. I love his show. But, like, also a WNL grad for them. So we've lived from a time where we had professors that had the same last names as like the slave owning, like activist, Southern, like general revolt, whatever. Not really allowed to talk about this stuff. 9/11 happened. That kind of pushed the race discourse down a little bit and amplified kind of like the terrorism, religion discourse. Through the Obama administration, which I definitely, when I was in Lexington, I didn't think there would be a Barack Obama. Through Barack Obama, and now we are at the end of Donald Trump. And
Hopefully.
you got, inshallah, and you got two kids. You got two kids. I got two kids. These four kids are ambiguous passing in terms of like their racial identity in this kind of very static world.
Yeah.
How do you think about like this moment, what's happening, how it feels? Like, take us a little bit just through what you're tossing around in your own mind as you're experiencing the moment that we're in.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different strands to that question. But you brought children up, so I'm gonna start with my children. I'm gonna start with my daughter. Both my kids are brilliant, beautiful kids. My daughter is a bold young woman, and I hope will grow into a bold woman one day. My goal as a father is to get the hell out of her way. Honestly, like to give her guidance and give her support, but to get the hell out of her way and let her do great things. I'm really sad. No, I'm not sad. I'm ecstatic. I'm sad about a small thing. And that is because of the pandemic, most news is off in our house. It's just psychologically not, I check the alerts on my phone so I am aware of what's going on, but it's not like before we might have just NPR running at some time of the day. Those days are over. But Kamala Harris is now the vice presidential nominee. I have a half-black daughter who really identifies with and is feeling her way through her black identity. And she is old enough that she was aware of the Hillary Clinton moment, and felt real loss when Hillary was nothing to do with Trump, because she was 5 years old at the time and not conscious of the political impact of it, but the fact that the country had an opportunity to elect a woman and didn't do it. They went with the guy again. Was a sad moment for her. Now, not only is there a woman who is in line for the second highest position in the administration, a woman from our state who is pursuing the highest position in the administration, and who looks like her, and who speaks to her, who cares about kids, and cares about black kids, I think is a really powerful thing that I was saying to myself earlier tonight. We still haven't shared this with her because we haven't had the news on. And when she made her speech and when Biden made the initial announcement, I was on work calls. Like, life hasn't slowed down for us to be like, hey, we need to celebrate this moment, but we're going to. And as you said, inshallah, we get the Orange Menace out and bring this together. But when I think of the current moment from the perspective of my children. They both were born under the leadership of America's first Black president.
Yeah.
I remember a time in my life where I thought there was never going to be a Black president. There's never going to be a president. They don't know that. That they have been born into a world where that is a possible thing. They have been born into a world where a woman can be on the Supreme Court, a woman can be a credible candidate for the presidency, women can be leaders in industry and in business and in politics, and so can Black people. And so, you know, it makes me very hopeful. But, you know, every time we make progress in this country, we take a couple steps backwards. But then we started moving forward again. And I don't think this moment is going to be any different. Now, that's not to say, you know, I think with the situation in Washington now, I think that the Trump administration is a clear and present danger to the Republic, and has been from day one. And I was at LAX protesting the travel ban that first weekend. I was at the Women's March. Like, I have been concerned. I've been concerned about Donald Trump since 2012, really. But really keenly since he became a credible candidate for president. And his administration, you know, we keep getting told, oh, he's gonna get better, he's gonna become more presidential, he's not gonna do crazy stuff. That whole hypothesis has been thrown in the trash
out the door
years ago. So we need to, in order for us to move forward, I really think not just he has to go, but I think the whole mentality that leads to Trumpism, that leads to the particular philosophy that seems to animate the Republican Party right now, needs to go. And it's the anti-democratic aspect of that philosophy, which I believe is rooted in a lot of respects in racism. That is incompatible with our national philosophy of self-governance.
Damn well said.
That's and so that's it. So we all, if we believe in self-government, if we believe in good government, then it's really incumbent on us to get to work now. And that's an exhortation to myself, as much as anybody else. Like, you know, we all live busy lifestyles. It is incredibly difficult. I don't know how any working parent, especially working moms, are figuring out how they're going to handle school and work by Zoom this fall. Like, it's impossible to think about. It's impossible to think about how much longer we can continue as a society with like this half-ass, paltry approach to controlling this pandemic that keeps us kind of in limbo. There's no telling how long we can take this as a society to continue to operate like this. So
yeah, the liminal, where we really are in a liminal state. We really, really are.
People are stressed out and burdened and have a lot on them. But we all, even in small ways, if we care about this democracy, we have to even find the small ways we can do something to get Joe Biden elected. And that, I want to really stress that to your listeners. If you guys give a shit about what I have to say, and if you don't, that's fine. You don't have to listen. But
nobody's listening that doesn't.
Your third party vote is not going to get rid of Donald Trump. you must, if you care about our democracy and if you want to see democracy preserved, you have to vote for Joe Biden. You have no choice. And I know he wasn't my favorite candidate. I don't think he was your favorite candidate.
No.
But at the same time, I don't think he's a bad candidate either. I mean, that's a whole conversation for another day. The point is I do think he'll listen to the left. I mean, I do think that there's an opportunity for more progressive leadership in Washington with Biden.
Yeah, of course.
Certainly would not happen with Trump. And the other thing I think to keep in mind is when we're managing our expectations, is that Trump has done an enormous amount of damage that needs to be repaired. And I don't think that we can realistically think we're just going to jump with both feet into advancing, the utopian progressive agenda in a first Joe Biden term. I think the first thing that needs to happen is resetting and getting, reestablishing the norms of how our government should operate.
On every single level. I mean, literally everything must be,
at every level, and hopefully not just resetting them, but then improving them. Because to me, I am a philosophically liberal person. I'm not probably a lot of people that were Bernie supporters would call me a neoliberal or a centrist. I reject that label, but I'm not, I operate, I think, in probably the traditional space of most Democratic voters. That said, to me, the most important thing is a government that is functional and responsive to citizens. And if the government doesn't meet that bar, then I don't care what the political sway is in either direction, it needs to go. Because at the end of the day, we need, bridges that are stable, and we need, electricity going into people's homes, and we need national security, and all of those functional the boring things that government does. We need those to operate well. People are really concerned about the post office right now. It's all over the news. And it's transparent that Trump was trying to undermine vote by mail. But taking a step back from that, the post office needs to be functional.
Yes.
People are dependent. It's in the Constitution. But it needs to be functional because businesses rely on it. Citizens rely on it. I am one of probably millions of Americans who receives prescription drugs in the mail that I take, maintenance drugs that I take on a regular basis. They come in the mail. Some of the news reports that I'm hearing for people, elderly veterans who are not getting their drugs on time because of postal delays. That shouldn't happen. It especially shouldn't happen because the president is trying to monkey around with the election. But even if that wasn't the motive, even if it was just pure incompetence, incompetence needs to be rooted out. There cannot be incompetence in the government. It's too important. So if you can't, and as you know, because you were, however briefly, a member of the Trump administration, as I recall, there has never been an effort in this administration to fully staff agencies or to fully staff agencies with competent people who are at the top of their game. We saw in the Ukraine scandal what happened to professional diplomats who were apolitical, who did what their jobs were supposed to do and then paid the price. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who basically got run out.
He's done. He's retired.
Those are the people who need to be in the government.
Yes, sir.
the people that are the yes men, the hacks, the people who they're just there to fluff Trump and tell him what he wants to hear, they need to leave public life forever. There's no role, there's no space for that in the government. There's no space for that. A government needs to be functional and responsive to citizens. It needs to be competent. The people there need to know their stuff, and they need to be doing the work to know their stuff. Do you know who, like, to me, I feel like is totally flogged in politics? Well, no, she's not totally flogged. One of the people who's kind of a lightning rod person right now is AOC. But one of the things that impresses me the most about her, and I don't agree with her on everything politically. Like I said, I don't know that I'm quite that left, but she just exudes what I'm talking about here. Yeah. That sense of responsibility to her constituents. Yeah. That sense of responsiveness and competence, and even though she makes a lot of headlines and she's in front of cameras a lot, she's very quiet, I think, in how she does it, in the way she does it. Her speech on the floor with what's his name, Kobo, or I can't even remember the guy's name.
Eviscerated.
You know what I mean? But that speech was absolutely flawless. And one of the things that was flawless about it was just the measured, completely serious, completely direct, unflinching, but measured way that she delivered it. And that type of, I think, confident, quiet, confident,
strength,
like
courage,
aggressive competence is what we need at all levels of our government, is people who are professionals. That's what
No, you're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right.
They're professionals, people that do this for a living and they know their shit, and you better get out of their way and let them do it. That's what I want to come back to Washington.
You know what's amazing is that, like, every one of the countries that you've been to, every one of the countries that receives international aid, every one of the member states of the United Nations, they are calling for that in their countries. Like, what Trump referred to as the shithole countries are countries that are calling for transparency in government. We need people who are professionals, who are competent. We need people who don't have corrupt financial interests, etc. And truly, the regression that Trump has brought about is just the complete falling apart of the system that has been created that differentiates the United States from those other societies. Like, talk about handing your exceptionalism and saying no thank you. Damien, this has been a tour de force, man, but it's not enough. We got to come back. I got to get more in the future. You got to promise you're going to come back.
Well, I've had so much fun doing this.
My man.
I'm deeply honored. My time is yours. Anytime.
I appreciate you, bro.
And join you, and keep killing it with this. I'm a huge podcast junkie. I've fallen off a little bit since I haven't had a daily commute for 6 months, but this one is a regular listen. So I appreciate people out there in podcast land. If you're new to the study, you need to go back and find some of these back episodes and listen to Ahmed break you down on Mississippi Goddamn and Sandra Bland, and there's some good stuff in the archives there. So thank you, my brother.
Damien DeLaney, I appreciate you. I appreciate your parents. I appreciate your integrity, and please send our love to your family, and we'll be together soon.
All right, my man. Peace.
All right, my people, you've been in the study. Thank you so very much. Damien DeLaney, Esquire, son of Lexington, Virginia, global traveler, ethicist, future Attorney General of the United States of America. Much love, everybody.